Well, the robots tell me I'm live now, so hello. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are. I have my chat window over here, so if I keep looking that way, that's why I'm checking in. I'm already seeing lots of hellos from all over the place. Wow. Hi, everybody. I always love this part. Everyone saying hi from where they are. So I'm in East Nashville, Tennessee, and the sun is finally out today after lots of cold and rain, and it's wonderful. I'm having a cup of tea. I hope you have a beverage of some sort wherever you are. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you about how today's workshop is going to go, and you can adjust yourself accordingly. I am going to talk at first a little bit about bow hold and bow mechanics, and then I'm going to show a way to play the tune Candy Girl, and then I'm going to show some other ways to think about playing Candy Girl. It's a really heavy-duty tune, and I want to approach teaching it maybe a little differently than I would approach teaching most fiddle tunes, because I sort of feel like Candy Girl isn't just a tune, it's sort of a spiritual journey as a fiddler. And so I want to try to think really zoomed out, really big picture about the tune, while also leaving you with a tune that you can play, hopefully, by the end of the workshop. For those of you who have done these workshops before, this one is a little bit different in that I have decided to set things up so that this archived video will just stay up. So you've bought your ticket, you now have access to it forever. In the past, my workshops I've tried to treat them more like this is a live event and I'll let you see it for a couple weeks after, but then it's coming down because it was just a live thing. And I'm going to approach this one differently, knowing that it's going to stay up. What that means is that I may not spend as much time on repetition as I have in past workshops, because I'm going to trust that you can come back and go over the stuff that you want to go over on your own afterward. So just saying, no matter how much you beg in the comment window for more repetitions on some phrase or other, I might not give it to you. Because I'm gonna try to deliver a lot of information, and part of it is knowing that you can come back and go through this video again as many times as you want. So just saying. However, if you do have questions or comments or observations or epiphanies that you want to share in the chat window, I fully encourage that. So go for it. And so after working on the tune, then we'll have sort of a Q&A time. So if you have more general questions about fiddly things, old time music, you can save that for the end. And I'm going to try afterward, I don't know how much you guys have used YouTube, but there's this sort of editing thing in YouTube. I think I'm going to try after this broadcast to go in and put chapters in this video so that you can skip to the parts you want to get to easily when you come back to the video. So we'll see how that goes. I'm just going to check the chat window real quick before I get started. Oh my goodness, so many happy hellos from everyone. Aw, Jamaica, I'm so glad you like the new album. I'll talk about that later. Aw, I miss everybody. It's so nice to see everyone saying hi in the chat window. Okay, so I'm going to talk about bow hold and sort of bow mechanics first. And this is because, well, so much of playing Candy Girl has to do with bow mechanics, but also it just seems to keep coming up with students in private lessons recently, where I realized it can be helpful to have some sort of basic information about how I am using the bow and where the variations in sort of pressure and attack are coming from. So I'm going to show you what I do. Now, bow hold is a super personal thing. Everyone's got their own way of coming at it. I had classical violin training as a kid, and so what I am doing is sort of a variation on classical violin bow hold. And the great thing about classical position is they really have it figured out. Like, there are really intelligent ergonomic things going on with classical position for the body in relation to the instrument. Because the fiddle is a super awkward instrument to play, and you can totally injure yourself doing the wrong things repeatedly. So I encourage you to think about how you're using your body to interact with the instrument. That said, I play folk music, and I have learned from a lot of people who approach the instrument in idiosyncratic ways, and not necessarily healthy ways, but ways that work. So I'm not saying that there's a right way to do this. There's an immense amount of leeway. So I'm just going to show you what I do and why I think it's helpful. So people ask why I choke up on the bow, because this is how I hold the bow. There's really no particularly good reason for that. And it's not something that I would encourage other people to do. Talk about idiosyncratic bow holds. This was just my own personal journey that partly had to do with the fact that I was coming from having played classical violin and knowing what a big leap I had to make to play old-time fiddle. And in trying to approach fiddle tunes, I found that what I needed from the bow was really different than what I had been trained to do with the bow in classical music. And so I started experimenting with different ways of holding the bow that would sort of shake myself out of habits, and ended up here. That's just where I'm comfortable, but really all it is a modified classical bow hold. So the things that I think are important in the bow hold are my thumb is bent. I'm going to hold this up to the camera and hopefully you'll be able to see. My thumb is bent, making contact with the stick on the tip and sort of to the side of the thumb. And I'm making contact on the first finger behind this knuckle. So those are both key elements to me, because by having the contact point be back here, I'm getting the hand over the bow. So I'm not holding the bow out here. I have my hand over. And the other key element, I think, is the space that exists between where my thumb is making contact with the stick and where my first finger is making contact with the stick. So they aren't right on top of each other. I'm not pinching. It's like this. So one way to think about this is you reach out to take a glass of water and you pour it out. That's sort of a basic approach to what your right hand is doing with a classical bow hold. So there's this space between the first finger and the thumb. The rest of my fingers are just floppy as can be. I mean, you want as much range of motion as possible in your hand, and so keeping everything relaxed is good. If you are modifying your bow hold, if like you've run into problems with the way you're using your bow and you want to try to adapt a little bit and try to do things a little more sort of correctly as far as classical position, it's going to be hard. It's a really daunting, difficult process to change the way you're interacting with the instrument if you have habits in place. So be patient with yourself and know that your hand isn't instantly going to be relaxed when you put it in the right position. It's going to feel kind of awkward. And so it just takes time and sort of checking in and micro adjustments in the way that you're interacting with the bow to get to the point that it's comfortable for you. So, I'm sharing all of these details of the mechanics because when I talk, and this particular tune, I'll be talking a lot about sort of oomph and emphasis and where you're digging in the phrase and with the bow. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about downward pressure with the hand. I'm talking about this very subtle pressure that comes from pushing up with the thumb and down with the first finger. So it's this little sort of fulcrum movement that's happening. It's such a tiny, subtle point of control of the bow. And so this is not a whole arm thing. This is not even a whole hand thing. It's just this really subtle kind of turning motion that comes from these two pressure points, here and here. And that's it. So it's really efficient as far as the effort that you're putting in to making these pulsy things happen and making these changes in dynamic happen. So that's why I want to point out this stuff about the mechanics of how my hand is working. I'm going to go into a lot of detail about the bow, and I guess I want to point out how few elements are actually important in the bow hold so that you don't get distracted too much by like overthinking what's going on with your right hand. The things that are important are very few in the right hand, but they're really important. And so, yeah, there's something else that comes up a lot in lessons and workshops is that people see what my right hand is doing when I'm playing, right? I've got a really floppy right hand and wrist. It looks very relaxed. People always comment on that. There's a lot of motion in my right hand and wrist. Don't get distracted by that. Like, that comes from having played classical violin and having been trained to have this sort of fluidity in the wrist that's related to the way that a classical player wants to make bow transitions seamless. So you're always leading with the wrist. So that's where this motion is coming from, is like a lot of kind of unrelated training. And the motion is not, like, the visual thing that's happening is not what's important. It's the mechanics of the thing, and there are a lot of different ways of getting at that. And so I don't want you to get distracted by the visuals. Don't think about what your hand and wrist look like. That's not what this is about. You could be doing something incredibly similar to what I'm doing and look totally different doing it. So it's, it's sort of like if you saw the way that somebody walked. Like, everyone has a way of walking, of moving their body and making that walking movement happen. And I'm not going to look like you look when you're walking and vice versa. And I don't want you to get too caught up in the visual aspect of it, because that's really meaningless. And can actually end up making you sort of make things more inefficient if you're trying to look a certain way instead of trying to create a sound. So that's just a little bit of a tip, I guess. So with all of those bits of information and those caveats out of the way, I'm going to get into the tune. So today's tune, just in case you haven't listened yet, is Candy Girl, which comes from a recording of Uncle Bunt Stephens, who was from Lynchburg, Tennessee, which is south of here. And he only ever recorded 4 sides, and they're all amazing. Candy Girl is a tune that it's just really deep because there's so little melody and there's so much rhythm. So if you're a clogger or you know any people who do clogging, flat-footing, this is like a favorite tune for flat-footers because it's just all about the groove and it's not about some sort of ornate melody. It's a really wonderful way to explore rhythm in the right hand. And the way I'm going to approach teaching it today is to show you sort of one basic way to do it. Because if you've listened to the Uncle Bunt recording, which you must do over and over and over again, you'll hear he's got a whole lot of different variations in the way that he rhythmically expresses this tune. So I've pulled out some particularly juicy bits that I think are basically a bowing exercise. So that's going to be sort of the home base for how we're going to play the tune today. And then I'll talk about some ways to sort of play with that and mess around in the same way that he messes around on the recording. It's really subtle, and that's the point. Like the nuance of it and the rhythmic nuance of it and the tininess of the motions that you're going to be making with your right hand are the reason I want to teach this tune and are the reason that this tune is like a lifelong practice. And every fiddle teacher I know teaches this tune, every old-time fiddler, and everybody teaches it differently because there's so many different approaches to what the noises that Uncle Bunt Stephens was making. And also another caveat is I've been playing this for a really long time, so I have obviously evolved my own ways of expressing this tune that are not strictly imitations of Uncle Bunt. So take that with a grain of salt. So let me play the tune for you a few times. I'll try to stick with the sort of home base version, and then I'll start breaking it down. So that is going to be our sort of home base version, which I think should be should be relatively close to the version that I have on my website under my tune videos. But I did make that tune video years ago, and I've been I feel like my approach to the tune has changed since I made that video, so I might have to make a new one. But generally pretty similar. So one thing I realized while I was playing that is that I should have definitely made clear that you should be in AEAE tuning right now. So if you haven't retuned, go ahead and do that. So the two low strings both come up a step. And on the recording, Uncle Bunt does some varying by playing in the lower octave, which we can talk about some or not because it's all the same. But even if we were only playing it on the top two strings, which you can play this whole tune on the top two strings only, even if we were, I would want you to retune because it changes the resonance of the instrument completely to tune the low strings up. So it won't sound the same if you play it in standard tuning. All right, so one thing to think about before we even start going through is that your default in this tune should be drone string. Like you should be thinking, I'm playing two strings the whole time. Obviously you won't be, but I want your default thinking to be two strings. And the variation in that sound is that you're taking one string out occasionally instead of the other way around. So I think it's a sort of a safer approach to be thinking, I'm droning all the time, and then occasionally I'm not, than vice versa. So keep that in mind. That's the first chunk. So if I were to exaggerate this, you'll notice a rocking motion in the right hand. Again, I don't want you to be distracted by the visual. I want you to be thinking about the sound that's happening. And if I'm pointing out something that the right hand looks like it's doing, that's just to sort of give you something to grab onto in trying to make the sound happen. So if we're thinking downs and ups, we have down, up in this phrase, but it's never just down or just up. There's always other stuff going on. So the way I'm going after this, and this is the level of nuance that I want to be able to communicate, but that's really hard to communicate. So as far as melodically what's going on, that's just a slur from the first finger to the second finger. And that's all. Nothing else moves in that phrase. But that down bow, already in that down bow, what I've started doing is the two strings together. Like I said, I want that to be your default, is two strings together. And then I've already lifted off of the higher string at that point in the bow stroke. So just in that first down bow, I'm gonna play both strings, lift off of the higher string, and then play both strings again. That's just in the first bow stroke. Now, when it comes to the next bow stroke, this little up bow, that's going to be a point where you aren't hitting two strings. You're going to just play the A string, well, second finger on the A string. So we've got the weird first down bow. And then the short up bow on one string, a short down bow on both strings. And then on this up bow, you're going to start on one string and then very quickly add in the other. So I'm going to try to do it super slow. Now keep in mind, this is insanely slowed down. So up to speed, you see how tiny those motions are and how incredibly small the moments of coming off of that drone string are. They're really brief. I think of it almost like this is subliminal rhythmic pulsing going on. It goes by so fast. And I'm showing you this in the hopes that it's going to sort of unravel some of the mystery of this tune. I don't want you to get hyper analytical about it. I'm just hoping to sort of give you some pointers on how to get in there. So let's just play that phrase a couple times. Again. So that's the first little bit. The next part, and again, this is another thing where we're gonna call this a structure for the tune, where your first finger is gonna come down on the E string on this next little phrase. In reality, I don't think Uncle Bunt actually did it that way. I think he was doing it more like, where the first finger doesn't come down until the end of the phrase. But just for the sake of giving us a little more of something to hang on to as a tune, I'm going to show it to you this way. So this first piece is the next chunk, same bowing. Going to put that first finger down on the E string. So just that chunk is. So these two parts are the same bowing, and we're differentiating between them by dropping that first finger down. The second finger is just hanging out a lot. So putting those two pieces together, let's do that a couple more times. I'm going to slow it down even more. One more time like that. Okay, so the next bit, let me just play the A part of the tune to keep it in my head and yours. So what we have so far is this sort of the second half of this phrase is, so far that's pretty familiar. And then so let me play that again even slower. So we're going to do that long up bow with the first finger down. So just this chunk of the phrase again. I'm going to do that again just like that a couple more times. Okay, hopefully you're at least getting a little bit of a handle on that. Remember, you can come back and watch this as many times as you want. And YouTube has speed control, so, you know, go down in the lower right corner and you'll be able to slow this down if I'm doing it too fast for you. So, lots of little subtle pulsy things going on inside of bow strokes. You might need to sort of overdo it if this is a new concept for you, but always keep in mind that where we're heading with this tune is subtle. We're going for nuance here. So that in the end, you know, it's just this sort of, like there's a sense of something rolling along and you're not feeling clobbered by some sort of rhythmic statement. It's just sort of happening. It's just there. It's all integrated. So that's the A part of the tune in the sort of home bass version. And for the sake of how we're going to play it together in the workshop today, I'm going to treat it as this tune as a 2A, 2B structured thing, even though obviously if you listen to the Uncle Bunt recording, he is much more playful with sort of how many times he plays any given part, anytime that he's going through it. So, so one time through the A phrase is. So we'll do that twice, and then we'll go on to the B part. So now I'm going to show you the B part. So the sort of version of his playing of the B part that I'm going to treat as our sort of what I keep referring to as like the home bass version is this one, because I think it's a good, again, it's a good bowing exercise. So. That's actually not the most sort of frequent variation that he does on the recording, but to me that's what that asks of your right hand is kind of more interesting than some of the other things that he's doing, where it's not only what I was talking about of sort of adding in and taking away a drone string or, you know, playing two strings at the same time, but it's also like real oomph, like there's this real digging in thing that happens at the same time. So the basics of it are, so that's a down, up, down, up, down, up. Again, nothing is ever just down or just up. There's always a different dimension going on here. And then the second chunk of the phrase is. So the bowing approach to both halves of this phrase are the same. The difference being the melodic phrase, such as it is, instead of ending on the second finger, the second half of the phrase goes to the open string. So I'm gonna sort of go into this assuming you can follow along with that notion of going up to the second finger and then going down to the open string. So we'll go through the entire B phrase instead of doing it in two halves. So it'll sound like this. Let's do that a couple more times. I'm going to slow it down even more. So now we've gone through the entire tune, and I'm going to go through it some more with a little bit more focus on exactly how I'm attacking with the bow. So I'm just going to check the chat window and make sure no one's having a meltdown. Okay, I'm not seeing any meltdowns going on, so I am assuming you're all fiddling away out there. So, yeah, emphasis. It's all about how you're digging in with the bow. So in this B part, for instance, starting on the open A, and then adding in the octave, the third finger on the E string. It's not just a sort of static thing of, there's a real sense of like, arr, I'm digging in when I add in that string, so. And also on all of these little end of phrase moments where there's a which I talk about in my workshops sometimes as a little scoopy thing. So that's a way of feeling what's going on in that right hand. There's a sort of scooping motion. That's not just about sort of where you're dropping and adding a drone string. It's about actually digging in. And again, when I'm talking about digging in, I'm talking about increasing pressure by doing this thing with my fingers. I'm not pushing down on the bow. So, so those sounds that you hear at the ends of those phrases, what you're hearing is a moment of the single string, the A string in this case, like a tiny moment of the single A string before the high string comes in. So again, defaulting to constantly droning, constantly having two strings playing, but sometimes there are these little moments where there isn't a second string playing. And so that's what you're hearing. That's part of what you're hearing in these end phrases. So that scoopy thing. So I'm adding in the drone string and I'm digging into both strings. To a certain extent, you have to dig in a little more when you're playing two strings at the same time as opposed to one. But this is like I'm emphasizing this because this is how you're creating the rhythmic phrase. This is how you're saying, here's how the beat feels. Here's what makes this danceable. And so if you listen to that throughout the whole tune, you'll hear what I'm talking about. It's a sense of just digging in and releasing pressure as a way of creating that rhythmic phrase. So. So hopefully you can hear what I'm talking about in there. I'm going to pour myself some more tea. So now I want to talk about kind of how I actually play the tune. Like if I were in a jam session or if I were playing this tune for a clogger. How I would actually play it is much more about the fun of kind of playing with the rhythmic emphasis and the sense of subtle variations in the way I'm expressing the rhythmic phrase, and that's sort of the fun, the jammy fun of the tune. And so the way that I have just broken down the tune for you, I intend not as this is how the tune goes, but as just an entry point for you to explore and have fun finding your way around the tune in different ways. And so, yeah, I'll just play it a little bit and kind of try not to think about the fact that I'm playing it for you. get the idea. Like, the fun is sort of playing with it and using different ways to express this same sort of almost non-melody phrase that this tune is. And yeah. Now, to go back, something was popping up over here. One sec. I'm having a hard time going back into the bowing pattern of A after playing part B. Yeah. It's gonna take a little time. Let me play through the whole tune again in our sort of home base way. And make sure you have a handle on it before we move on to other things. So. Hopefully that helped some. Oh, and I do want to point out that although I'm practically ignoring the left hand, what's going on in the left hand is also important in that, just like in the right hand, what's going on is really subtle. So there's this very simple little grace note, basically, from the first finger to the second finger, which, again, that's something you can play with. You can make it more of a very clear, or it could be, so it's either notes or it's a grace note, either way. But that, again, is something that you can play with, and it's there's nuance in that. I'm not sliding, it's just a slur from the first finger to the second finger. And then in the B part, the way that I get to that octave on the E string, sometimes it's just planted there. And then sometimes I sort of go. So again, there's stuff in there that you can play with. There's hardly any notes, but the ones that are there, you can do lots of little fun, subtle things with. So, in showing you the way that I vary the tune, I am hoping to empower you to go exploring on your own, because the important parts of this tune are not the idea of down, up, or where is the slur, or where do I cross strings, or where do I add in the drone. It's about finding your way to those rhythmic pulsing sounds. And again, there are lots of different ways to get there. And the way you get there may wind up being quite different than the way that I do. But the journey is the important part. And this is the thing that I get the most concerned about as a teacher of old-time fiddle music, is that getting overly analytical about something, like trying to break down a bowing pattern, which I don't even believe in bowing patterns myself, because I think they don't exist on their own. They happen only in context and unpredictably. So I don't think it's a good thing to lean on. But that sort of approach of kind of trying to break something up into disparate chunks is not really the way into this music. And the idea of trying to bow something just like somebody else is helpful, but not if you get so far up in your head about it that you lose sight of the bigger picture. And I want you guys to keep your focus on the big picture here, which is the groove of this tune and all the possibilities for how you get there. And know that the way you play it now is not going to be the way you play it a couple years from now. This is a very evolving thing, like all tunes, hopefully. But this one in particular is like, I mean, I'm being only vaguely facetious when I talk about it as a spiritual journey. I think it's really, like all fiddle tunes, it's as deep as you want it to be. And so I think treating it as a process and not as a tune is a really good way to approach it, and to use it as a platform for your own exploration of how you can expand your right hand vocabulary, how you can find different ways to get at the rhythmic sounds that you want to hear in your own fiddling. So things like how do you feel the downbeat? How do you express the downbeat with your bow? How do you get there? How do you dig in such a way that you have a sense of this is where the downbeat is, and also somebody might want to dance to this. So this is the pep talk portion of the workshop where I say, go figure it out, because these things that I've shown you are not correct. These are just ideas for a way in, so that you have a handle on something, and from there can start exploring and branching out. And also, these workshops are for people of all levels. So if you are early on in your fiddle journey and all you can do is like play the first couple phrases really, really slowly, that's fine. Because I think this tune is such a good way to start exploring with your right hand and to keep yourself from getting into rhythmic ruts with your right hand, which is always what I want for people who learn from me, is to have a lot of freedom in the way that they express themselves with their right hand. So I think maybe I've covered the tune and the pep talk. Let me check the chat window and see if you guys have questions, comments, revelations. Um, is this what they call rocking the bow? If so, you rock. Thank you very much. And I used to think this tune was boring. That's the thing, man. So I always like to tell this story about that I heard from John Herman about Art Stamper, who was a delight. So Art Stamper, if you don't know, was someone who grew up with old-time music, became an amazing bluegrass fiddler, and then sort of later in life got really interested and geeked out about old-time music from his family and stuff that he grew up hearing. And so, you know, he was someone who played a lot of bluegrass and who also played a lot of old-time. And he was just so in love with these, you know, sort of going back and revisiting these old-time tunes. And he would share them with bluegrass friends. And John Herman told me a story about Art Stamper being really excited about some old-time fiddle tune and played it for a bluegrass musician friend of his. And the guy's response was, "That tune doesn't have a melody." And Art said, "Tune like that doesn't need a melody," which to me is like, first of all, beautiful, wonderful Art Stamper story, but also I always tell that story when I teach this tune because I feel like this tune is the total like epitome of that concept, where it's like this tune does not need a melody because it's beyond, it has transcended melody. So anyway, that's what I have to say about that. I guess since people aren't getting into specifics of this tune, I think I've covered enough that you can go back in this video and play along on the parts that you need to. And I will reiterate, I have a whole page on my website that's just tunes played normal speed and then slow and then like really slow. And now those tunes are all also speed adjustable. So in addition to my own slowing down of the tunes in the videos, you can also slow the videos down. So if you go to rainagellert.com, or if you can't spell my name, go to fiddlegeek.com and click on fiddle, and you'll see there's tune videos, there's resources, and there's information about lessons on there. And so this tune, sort of the home base version of this tune that we worked on, is also there if you just want the tune and not all of this chatter. You guys are adorable. I love you. Okay, so I think we're into the Q&A portion of things now, and someone is asking, on your violin setup, is your bridge cut flatter for easier double stops? Slightly, yes. If you take your fiddle to a luthier who is used to working with fiddle players, they will probably know that old-time fiddlers prefer a slightly flatter bridge than classical players. But you don't have to have a flat bridge to play two strings at the same time. It's personal preference. So it doesn't, your setup really is not going to make much difference in whether you can play drones and double stops. It's just, how do you like it to feel? And yeah, I'll show you. My bridge looks, I don't know if that's gonna be visible or not, but it is, it's flatter than a classical setup would be. And yeah, someone's pointing out that this tune has similarities with Uncle Bunt's Sail Away Ladies. Another tune that I say, work on, go do it. Also profoundly deep, wonderful for working on that elusive thing called bow rock, which is really, it's about finding that rhythmic pulse and playing with the way that you add in and take away your drone strings, your double stops, and how you dig in and scoop with the bow to make those rhythmic phrases happen. Okay, so I have a question here about cross tuning, which I haven't actually demoed kind of playing it on the lower strings, because it's really all the same. One of the fun things about being in this sort of open tuning is you can kind of add things in, like if you're really getting excited, you can sort of go like, you can make a bigger sound if you want to. But one of the questions here is from someone who isn't used to cross tuning and asked about whether I have lighter gauge strings on the bottom strings. I don't. What I have on this fiddle are medium gauge helichords, which I love, and a Kaplan non-whistling E, which I also love, also medium. And tuning your strings up a step is, it feels scary if you're not used to it, but it's not that much tension on the instrument, and the strings are perfectly happy to tune up a step. Occasionally I tune up more than a step for weird tuning situations. I've done it. And then, beyond a step, it starts feeling like, that feels a little tense. But no, any kind of strings, even if you had heavy gauge strings, you could tune them up a step and it would be okay. They just might not sound as good. I use heavy gauge strings on the fiddle that I tend to put in lower tunings more. But you don't need to use light gauge strings to retune. It only feels scary at first. I will say though, if you're using synthetic core strings like classical musicians do, like dominants, they do not really like being retuned, and sometimes dominants especially will tend to break if you want to tune them up this high. So that's the one caveat. I use steel core strings, which are much happier with being tuned up and down and all around. But as far as the instrument, it's fine to tune up whatever gauge strings you have on there. Just hopefully the strings themselves won't be too unhappy. Interesting question here. Is there anything non-negotiable bow stroke wise in this tune? Like the up bow on the third phrase of the A part? Again, in a zoomed out sort of way, there is no such thing as a non-negotiable bow stroke. They're all up for grabs and they can all be switched around. However, since the point of this workshop is to give you an in on the tune, all I will say is that as you're playing and exploring, a very safe way to approach this tune and a lot of old time tunes is to start the phrase on a down bow and end the phrase on an up bow. Anything in between is negotiable. But as far as like having a handle, having a place to land and start, that's a good way to think about it. Otherwise, it's about how specific you are personally wanting to get about a phrase. So for me, when I'm learning a tune, first I listen and I listen and I listen and I listen, and I make sure that I have the whole tune in my head and I can sing it to myself. And then when I pick up the fiddle and try to make that tune come out, generally there's going to be some turn of a phrase somewhere that I'm going to get tangled up in. Whether it's something subtle about the melody, maybe an ornament or an intonation thing, or, you know, some nuance of that sort, where it doesn't just sort of automatically happen. I'll be like, wait, why does what I'm playing sound different than the thing that I'm trying to imitate? And, you know, sometimes it's a bowing thing where there's a specific phrase that I really like. I want to express that phrase the way it is on the scratchy old recording that I'm learning it from. And I just go through a process of trial and error until I land on the thing that feels the closest to that. And that is, I mean, since that's the way that I learn, I would encourage you to do plenty of that, because it's just such a good way to, again, to come back to my earlier theme, to keep expanding your right hand repertoire. So I'm not going to say that there's anything that's non-negotiable. I'll just encourage you to start phrases on a down bow and end them on an up bow, and then find the phrases that you're really fixated on reproducing, and find ways to reproduce those. So let's see here. What else we got? Thank you so much, everyone who's saying nice things about having workshops and classes on here. It's really fun for me too, and I've been having so much fun just thinking about this tune in like, well, what's important and how do I want to talk to people about this tune? So I'm not sure what the next tune is going to be. I haven't actually thought that far ahead, and I don't know when it's going to be. When I have been doing this, it's generally been about every 4 weeks, but I need to look at the calendar and see what's happening in 4 weeks. This new setup I'm using with I'm just going to leave the ticket purchasing thing up, and I'm just going to leave this link up, means that even if your schedule doesn't align with mine, the next workshop is going to be done the same way, and so you can buy a ticket and watch it whenever after it's over. I really do welcome your input, though, on tunes and topics and things you would like me to cover in these workshops. Or another thing I've been thinking about doing is just creating some short content, some short videos, like maybe just a little video where I specifically talk about right-hand mechanics, that kind of thing, and put those up also on the Ko-fi page as something that people could buy for like a few bucks. I'm kind of trying to figure out how to make sort of purchasable bits of fiddle content, because I have obviously loads of free fiddle content on my website, and I think maybe there are ways I could extract a few dollars from you fiddle geeks out there. So I welcome your suggestions on that kind of material as well. Okay, someone else is saying, on the other hand, can you hurt your fiddle by staying cross-tuned all of the time? Maybe, I guess. Like maybe if you tune up and then put it in the case and don't touch it for months or something, maybe that would be a little stressful for the instrument. This one is often left in AEAE, and it's okay. I will say, though, a lot of the time when I'm playing around the house, I tune down. I have hearing loss and tinnitus in my left ear, like distortion, all sorts of weird things in this ear. And it sometimes gets extra sensitive to certain tones on the fiddle. And yeah, tuning down instead of up, so tuning to GD, GD, or some variation thereof, is a little sweeter. It's quieter, mellower, less edgy. Cross A is great if you're playing a square dance, really projects. So And since that's where most people do end up playing this tune, like in jam sessions and stuff, I just went ahead and taught it in Cross A. Let's see. Okay, I think I've covered most things. Okay, so now we're at the sort of ending spiel portion of the program, which is to say, I will be doing another workshop. I'll collect your emails, and I should be able to alert you when I get the next one on the schedule. But I also, of course, encourage you to follow me on all the various social media. In particular, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because there are certain sort of things with YouTube that you can't do until you have 1,000 subscribers, and I'm not there yet. And so subscribing to me on YouTube would be very helpful to me. If I could get to 1,000 subscribers, I would have different ways, again, to sort of monetize content and whatever. And if you subscribe, you don't have to get notifications if you don't want to. You can subscribe and then mute the notifications. So that's one thing. Another thing is that I do offer private lessons online, and it's fun, and there's zero expectation on my end that you're gonna sort of become a regular student. The way that I like to work as a teacher is I want to assist people in learning on their own. So I rarely have regular students. It's more a thing where people just kind of schedule something when they want to check in or solve a problem or go over a particular tune. And so you're welcome to use me as your sort of fiddle sounding board if you are stuck on something and want some feedback. And you can find that information, FAQ, about my lessons on my website. New CD just came out 2 weeks ago. It's a duo CD with Kieran Kane, who's my partner, and this is our third album. It's a mix of our original songs, country cover, but there are a couple fiddle tunes on here, both newer tunes. One of them, The Golden Ticket, which is written by my friend Eric Merrill, one of my favorite tunes, and also my tune, I Thought You Were a Goat, #1. So you can go to kanegellert.com to order that. There's a link from my website, of course. And I think that kind of covers it. So let's play the tune a couple times through just to wrap up here. And if you have any last minute questions, put them in the chat window. there you go. I hope you have a lot of fun noodling around with Candy Girl and exploring all the rhythmic possibilities and not getting stuck in any bowing ruts and going back and listening to Uncle Bunt and finding other people's versions of the tune. And yeah, there's a lot of cool takes on that tune floating around out there. So I hope you'll do a lot of listening and digging and exploring. And again, send me your ideas for tunes and topics that you want me to cover on workshops or in short videos. And hopefully you'll hear when the next workshop is happening, probably in about a month. So thank you so much for tuning in and playing along, and the wonderful, sweet, hilarious chatting as always in the chat window, which I'm going to go back and make sure I didn't miss anything particularly juicy, but really, really appreciate it. You guys are the funnest, and yeah, keep in touch, have fun, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye! I'm ending the stream now.